This is Mrs. Palmer-Quay with the first video for Unit 12 on the lymphatic and immune systems. Today we're going to look at the lymphatic system and its structure and function. The lymphatic system has several key functions. The first is that it returns interstitial fluid or tissue fluid, the water and other nutrients that have squeezed out of those leaky capillaries down in the capillary beds in the tissue level. And this liquid needs to get back into the blood system in order to maintain blood volume. And so the first role of the lymphatic system is to pick up this extra fluid. Once it enters the lymphatic system, it's known then as lymph, but to pick up the water and other nutrients that has been squeezed out of the capillaries and bring it back into the circulatory system. A second role of the lymphatic system that we'll talk about more when it comes to digestion is that it is involved in transporting digested fats to into the circulatory system, and so they carry in a particular type of lymphatic vessel called lacteals, but we're not going to really focus on that this unit. We'll talk about it when we get to digestion. And then the other main role of the lymphatic system is to be part of our body's defense against foreign invaders, bacteria and viruses and other pathogens that are out to make us sick. The lymphatic system is very important in that, and we will talk a lot more about this in the next video that gets into the immune system. So let's start with talking about the lymphatic pathway. How does the lymph move through the body? It starts with the very, very small vessels that are known as lymphatic capillaries, but they, unlike our circulatory system capillaries, they're not a cycle, a circle that goes around. They only go one way, so they have dead ends. They are found on the venous side of the capillary bed. They are not found on the arterial side, and we find them everywhere in our body except our central nervous system. Like the veins, there are valves in the larger lymphatic vessels in order to keep the lymph from flowing backwards. And the way that the lymphatic system moves lymph through the vessels is very similar to what we see in our veins of our circulatory system. Muscle contractions and the change in pressure due to respiration help pull the lymph up from your toes back to your heart. The larger lymph vessels are very similar to veins. It's sort of a similar low pressure system, and do also have smooth muscle tissue that can constrict, but they aren't as tough as veins. They aren't as thick. The lymphatic capillaries are just teeny tiny and very hard to even find in dissections. The circulation, or not circulation, but the movement of lymph through the lymphatic pathway travels through various lymph nodes that we'll talk about later, and this is a very important part of your lymphatic system. And then the lymph will re-enter the bloodstream at the subclavian veins. Both the right and the left subclavian vein have a lymph duct coming into, a collecting duct entering into it. Before we get on to some pictures, a few more slides, or one more slide at least with words, talking about the formation of lymph. If you think about what's happening down in the capillary beds, we have this situation known as filtration that we talked about several times already, that the osmotic pressure inside the capillaries pushes water and small molecules out of the bloodstream into the surrounding tissue and in between all those cells. And this is really a very important thing because we need to have glucose, for example, traveling in the blood. It needs to get into cells so that we can use it to make energy. But glucose needs to get then out of the bloodstream, so it gets pushed out through very, very tiny slits in these leaky capillaries down in the capillary bed, and then it is bathing the cells, and the receptors on the cell membrane along with insulin then can transfer the glucose from the interstitial fluid into the cell. So it's a good thing that filtration happens down on the tissue level. But the filtration generally comes out on the there's more filtration going on. It normally exceeds reabsorption. So more is coming out than going back in because of the osmotic pressure caused by the albumin proteins that are left behind. So remember that those do not move out through those tiny spaces in the leaky capillaries. The albumin is too large, and so it stays in the capillary vessels and it pulls through osmosis water back in. But there's not enough albumin normally to move all the fluid back in, so that there is a net buildup of fluid among your body cells out in the tissues. And this is what the lymphatic system is having to, or is one of its roles is designed to do, so that you have a higher level of pressure in the tissue. The tissue fluid hydrostatic pressure is higher than in the capillaries, and the lymphatic capillaries are sort of there as an empty space waiting to take something in, and so that the fluid then flows into the lymphatic capillaries, and once it enters into those capillaries, it becomes then known as lymph. When it's outside, when it's inside the bloodstream, we're talking about plasma, and when it's in between the bloodstream and the cells, we talk about tissue fluid or interstitial fluid. And then when it moves into the lymphatic capillaries, it becomes known as lymph. It's all the same stuff primarily. We do lose some nutrients as the cells absorb, but then we gain some waste products as the cells excrete them into the interstitial fluid. But the base foundational component of this is water, is plasma. So this process prevents the accumulation of too much fluid. If things go wrong and somebody does start accumulating too much fluid, more goes out and not enough goes back in, then you have the condition of edema. All right, so let's look at some pictures here. So this diagram is showing these dead-end lymphatic capillaries. It does not have, the capillaries in our circulatory system just keep on going around and around. You go from arteries to arterioles to capillaries to venules to veins and back around again. But the lymphatic system starts with capillaries that have an end to them. They're like dead-end streets. And so here is our blood capillary, and fluid has been flowing out through the spaces in between the cells of the capillaries down in the capillary bed, along with the nutrients and the things that all these various cells here in the tissue need. But then there's a lot of the fluid then that builds up in the interstitial fluid. The pressure gets high enough to actually push it into the lymphatic vessels. And the way that the cells in this cell wall here of these lymphatic capillaries are arranged is that they're overlapping, so that one, just make a little diagram here, overlaps another one just a little bit, and it ends up making kind of a one-way valve that lymph can flow in, but then with back pressure it can't get out again. So these are designed as a one-way door to help the fluid get into the vessels and then to stay there. This diagram just shows you the general path of the lymph. It comes in at the capillary level, flows up some lymph vessel. We talk about the capillaries here, and then when they come together they form lymph vessels. We've got some valves showing just like in your veins. We've got a lymph node, and this is just sort of a very symbolic diagram, so we're just showing one lymph vessel going in, and then eventually all of the lymph will be sent back into the bloodstream, entering here in the subclavian vein. So the lymph moves from capillaries to lymph vessels known as afferent vessels, just like in our central nervous system, or into our nervous system, sorry, not just central, and then to the lymph nodes, we will talk about what they do in a minute, to efferent vessels on the other side of the node, to the lymphatic trunk, which is running right up here along your spinal column in your central part of your body, just like your vena cava. They run very close together. And then to a collecting duct, and eventually back to the subclavian vein. So we have two collecting ducts in our body. One collects from the right quarter of your body only. That is the right lymphatic duct that enters into the right subclavian vein. And then the rest of your body lymph comes in through the thoracic duct, which is coming up. That's the actual one that's coming up alongside your spinal cord and enters in your left subclavian vein. So for reasons completely unknown to us yet, science hasn't figured out if there's any particular reason why 3/4 of the body flows into one collecting duct and 1/4 of the body flows into the other, but that's how it works. So lymph nodes, every bit of lymph goes through at least one, if not very multiple number of lymph nodes. Sometimes we call these glands, lymph glands, but they're not really a gland. They're serving as filtering centers to clean up the lymph for any pathogens or foreign invaders. And so they are filled with lymphocytes, and there are several different kinds, and we'll talk more about them in the next video. And macrophages, which you remember are the phagocytic white blood cells. Those are the ones that can move and engulf and eat particles that do not belong in the lymph. The interior of the lymph node is this very complex arrangement of spaces, chambers, and channels. And there are more channels coming in than going out. So that creates a bottleneck, so that you've got all of these things flowing into the lymph node, and then there's not so many going out. And so the particles get stuck in the middle because they just can't flow through as easily as the lymph itself, the heavy, basically water-containing substance that moves on through, but the stuff that's in it gets stuck. And so large particles of whatever it is, be it bits and pieces of cells that have died and you just need to get cleaned up, or bacteria, whatever, it gets stuck in the lymph nodes, and that's where your lymphocytes then and macrophages can step into their roles and clean it up and destroy them and take care of things. We have an actual diagram of a lymph node here on the right. You can see it just kind of looks like a bean shaped, and I'm sure that you've had some kind of illness, probably something upper respiratory tract somewhere in your life, and you felt your lymph node, the doctor has felt your lymph nodes, or you have felt the lymph nodes, the submaxillary ones right there below your jaw. Lymph nodes are found everywhere in your body, but there are certain important ones. I just want to emphasize some of the the key areas where nodes are grouped. Remember, the nodes are sort of there as a first line of defense for things that have gotten into the circulatory system and then moved into the lymphatic system. And so groups of nodes in the cervical and the axillary and the inguinal regions of the body kind of are there as a wall against any kind of bacteria that maybe has entered into your body because of a wound in your extremity. If you just think about it, you tend to bang yourself up more on your arms and your legs than you do on, say your central chest region. How many wounds have you had on your breastbone compared to how many times you've cut your finger open? I mean, we just we tend to be invaded from the extremities on in, and so there are groups of lymph nodes standing ready, waiting, full of lymphocytes, ready to take care of any bacteria that may have snuck in. So something that has come in on the arm, it's going to run through the axillary, the armpit area. If it's come in through your foot, there's actually some right behind your kneecap, but eventually we'll get up here into the junction between your leg and your torso. And so these key areas are protecting against wounds on the extremities coming in towards the central part of the body. Nodes are strictly defined as having a connective tissue capsule surrounding them. We also have nodules, which are smaller than nodes and are not encapsulated. They do not have that connective tissue. And they are found in all mucous membranes. And if you remember, mucous membranes are the lining of cavities that are open to the outside. So inside your mouth and your respiratory system and your digestive system and your excretory system and your reproductive system are all lined with mucous membranes. And because they have an opening to the outside, again, it is a place where potential pathogens could come in. And so your nodules are waiting and ready to get your immune system fired up and going if something should happen to enter your body. And then, as I already said, swollen lymph nodes indicate a lot of immune activity is happening in a particular local area. And so what is swollen gives you some idea about where the invasion is coming from. A very common lymph node that I'm sure you've heard about is your tonsils. It's actually a nodule, not a node. And it's the tonsils themselves. There's actually 3 tonsils in this general area. When we're saying the word tonsils, though, mostly what people are referring to are the palatine tonsils. Those are the ones that are found on the lateral section of your pharynx. So here on the left is a normal tonsil. You really can't see anything over here besides the interior of the mouth. But on the right, you see someone who has very swollen tonsils on both sides. And so these are the palatine tonsils, and these are the ones that certainly when I was a child everybody had removed after you had a repeated bout of sore throat and other upper respiratory infections. You went in, I was 5 years old when I had mine removed. And so it was, kind of the idea that doctors thought that they became inflamed and stayed inflamed, and so we needed to take them out. Along with the palatine tonsils, sometimes people have adenoids removed, and they are found, you can't really see them on this picture, but they are more straight back in your pharynx against the posterior wall. And then there are also tonsils. Again, we're talking about lymph nodules, so not what we see. We don't see them quite the same way, but there are some found right at the back of your tongue. So if you think about on the back of your tongue here and in the center of your back of your mouth and on either side, you can see that the tonsils, these 3 types of tonsils, are forming a ring of active defense around the pharynx where you are taking in excuse me, food and liquids that may be contaminated with bacteria, or you are breathing, if you become a mouth breather, you're breathing in air that could be contaminated with bacteria or viruses. And so here they are encircling that opening, ready to step into action, to trap foreign invaders, to alert the immune system that a problem is coming, to set everything else in motion. Another type of lymph nodule, or grouping of lymph nodules that you probably have not heard of, are Peyer's patches, and these are found in your small intestine. In fact, they're found in the farthest part of your small intestine, which is known as the ileum. And the Peyer's patches are one of the ways that we identify, because there's not really a road sign saying you're now entering a new section of the small intestine, but it's one of the ways we identify that we are in that distal portion. The Peyer's patches are important because there's all the absorption going on in your small intestine. So this slide down here, we're looking on the right. These are actually the villi, the finger-like projection that are found all along the interior of your intestines that by these finger-like projections provide more surface area so that there are more cell surfaces available to absorb the nutrients that have been digested down in your intestine. And right behind them you can see that we've got these areas of lymphatic tissue, and these are your Peyer's patches. And so they're close to the flow of substances in from the digestive system, and so if there are any foreign invaders, and the Peyer's patches are mainly involved as a trigger response. They get the immune response going before the invaders actually make it from the intestine into the bloodstream. So they sort of are an early warning system saying something's coming and you need to be ready for it. And so the Peyer's patches are able to pick up the identifying characteristics of different bacteria, the antigens that would be present that are markers saying, this cell is not one that belongs to whatever person this nodule is found in. And so they don't go on the direct attack, but they're mainly involved in getting the body ready for some of the other lymphocytes later on to actually go in and destroy the bacteria. The largest organ in the lymphatic system is the spleen. And it's a filtration organ like your lymph nodes, but it's not filtering lymph, it is filtering blood. And as we've talked about earlier, it has a very important role in removing old, defective red blood cells. The spleen is found on your left side, behind your stomach. It is sort of below your rib cage, heading towards your back. And it, like the lymph nodes, is composed of a lot of interior channels and chambers, but they are filled with blood, not filled with lymph. What's interesting about the structure of the spleen, if you look at this slide down here on the right, you can see sort of these white circles that are surrounded by a darker red patch. And that's the two types of tissue that you see in spleen. It's called white pulp, that central area, and then red pulp. The white pulp is white because it's full of lymphocytes, and white blood cells gives it that color. This is where the plasma of the blood is filtered and cleaned up. The red pulp is where the red blood cells are being dealt with. And also it has a good supply of lymphocytes and macrophages. The spleen then is, as the blood comes through the spleen, the red blood cells are actually forced out of the capillaries. Now, that doesn't happen down in the capillary beds, but in the spleen it does. And as the red blood cells are forced out of the capillaries, ones that have been around a while, they've been circulating for 3 or 4 months, they might not make it through the squeezing out activity and might actually just sort of fall apart on the way out. And so then your white blood cells, you've got a lot of debris there to clean up. And so the old cells are taken out of circulation, and the white blood cells take those bits and pieces of debris and break it down further and send them on to either recycling or just out for excretory system. Plus, if there are any bacteria present in the blood, it will be picked up by the lymphocytes and the macrophages as well. So that your spleen is really important in keeping the health of keeping your blood healthy. Now, if you are in or know someone has been in a car accident, may know that the spleen can be removed. It is not an organ that is absolutely essential for life. Some of the other parts of your lymphatic system can take on the role of what the spleen was designed to do if it is necessary to remove it. If the spleen has been injured, of course, there will be a lot of blood loss, and so it's something that doctors are very aware of and may have to take very rapid action if someone has had it damaged. And then the final organ we want to talk about, and I've mentioned it in the endocrine system, is the thymus. The thymus, is, as we've talked about in class, is larger in infancy and up through puberty, and then it shrinks as an adult. So we've got a picture here of the thymus. This is this big organ right around the breastbone in an infant, and then you see, as an adult, it's hardly there. By the time you're about my age, in your 50s, it's probably pretty much just connective tissue and fat and very little function. The thymus is important because that is where the T lymphocyte, the T cell, matures and differentiates. White blood cells, like your red blood cells, are made in the red bone marrow, but in the very early stages, these cells are transported to the thymus, where they then are controlled by other hormones, various types of thymosin hormones. There are several different types, into the particular type of lymphocyte that it needs to be formed, the type of T lymphocyte. And so they are made with all the other blood cells in the bone marrow, but are directed and changed into the form that they need to be in the thymus. The thymus, as it says, it has gone away by the time you're an adult. Actually, by the time you reach puberty, it's on the downside of its use. But these T lymphocytes then are one of the cells in your body that stick around. Once you make a T cell, they remain. For one thing, your thymus goes away, so you can't make any more, but they have very long lifespan. And that's part of the reason why you can have repeated exposure to a pathogen and not get sick a second time. If you had one chickenpox, you're not going to have that same disease, chickenpox again, because your body has created a memory system because of these immune system cells that stay alive for many, many years. I wanted to just mention the relationship between cancer and lymph nodes, because I'm sure that you've heard, especially with something like breast cancer, that the person not only had a mastectomy, but they also had the lymph nodes removed around in their armpit. And so, what is this? Why is that important? Well, when cancer metastasizes, when it starts to spread, you have cells that break off the original tumor and from that site, and they enter the surrounding tissue, and they can go either into the blood or they can be picked up by the lymphatic system. If they're picked up by the lymphatic system, that means they're going to go through the lymph nodes that are closest to the tumor site. And the lymph nodes are set up to send the fluid on, but to filter out anything bigger than water and very small biochemicals. So a cancer cell is a cell and it's pretty big. So that the lymph nodes will be contaminated with the cancer cells first. And therefore the presence of cancer cells in a lymph node suggests that there may have been, cancer cells have already passed through and will be forming tumors elsewhere. So this is a indication that metastasizing has happened, and depending upon how far away from the original tumor site you find cancer cells in lymph nodes, that gives you an indication of how much that cancer may have spread. If for the case here of breast cancer, if it's only these first lymph nodes that you're seeing cancer cells but not ones that are further away, then the metastasate has not metastasized very far. Its prognosis is much better than somebody that is showing cancer cells in lymph nodes that are much further away from the original site. So that's why the doctors will remove lymph nodes and take a look at what's going on in them whenever someone is being treated for cancer. So that covers what I wanted to say about the lymphatic system. The next video, as I said, we'll be looking at the immune response and some of these different lymphocytes that are involved in that.